What I want to offer is community as the vision of the future, because curtailing our energy use has to be the #1 step, but we clearly need to make the structural systemic changes which support and advance these individual lifestyle changes. The global industrial system, which is of course dependent upon cheap fossil fuel energy, huge inputs of other non-renewable resources, and which will become an increasingly problematic and unviable way to provide for our needs, it has to be replaced with something else. So we describe this community paradigm as decentralized, as Stephanie talked about last night. It's place-based, local, self-reliant, and low energy. So it's as we curtail, which is really contributing less and less to the destructive global system, it's starving that system, we need to begin to contribute more and more to the alternative, and that's community. Developing resiliency, this is a concept, comes from ecology, the ability of our communities to withstand outside shocks. And we do that by meeting our most essential needs closer to home. Financially, we've talked a lot about at this conference. We can't be putting our money in the global growth system, which is of course undermining its own ability to continue to provide returns to us. And instead, we need to invest that locally in the people, the businesses, and the technologies that are going to more directly sustain us and sustain generations to come as well. This includes systems that have been talked about a lot at this conference: community-supported agriculture, community-owned energy systems, small business incubators. But it also involves building social capital, as Stephanie mentioned. Joanna Macy described this as when things get hard, as building social capital so that when things get hard, we won't in fear turn on each other. That's the importance of social capital. Our founder, Arthur Morgan, talked about the most important kind of community as small and local. Small, of course, refers to a much more realistic scale of human habitation than we currently have, which is much less centralized and operates much more as a web of interconnections between people and among people, which allow much more meaningful relationships to develop. For more than 99.5% of our existence as humans, we've lived in small groups of from a few dozen to a few hundred people. So this is a way of living that we are uniquely suited for. And local refers, of course, to the necessity of being in close proximity with those whom you have economic relations. And this is a very important point, because I think part of the reason that we can continue to allow and contribute to the ecological devastation of the planet and the growing misery of the world's poor through these daily economic decisions that seem so trivial is that we're separated from that reality by so much distance. You know, everyone and everything that provides us what we need to survive is a complete abstraction. We're consuming brand names, not resources and people, which is what we're actually consuming. But if we could actually see the workers toiling in the farms and the sweatshops, and actually see the falling forests and the scarred landscapes, I don't think any of us in this room could continue to treat them with such moral disregard. And so by developing that face-to-face economic system, I think naturally we'll come to have more respect for those who are providing our necessities, making sure they have a fair wage and safe working conditions. And in turn, they'll make sure that our health and our safety is provided for. And this mutual relationship serves to improve everyone's well-being, including the well-being of nature, and doesn't just serve corporate profit like our current system. So really, community and life itself is about intimate interdependency. The more we separate things, the more we separate production from consumption and producers from consumers, the more we're hiding the reality of the consequences of our decisions from our everyday life, and the more we're creating an illusory world. And the more that we forget the connections and we presume that they're not there, then the more difficult I think it becomes to come back to the real world. And at its root, this movement, I believe, is about reconnecting to each other and to nature and relearning those relationships that sustain us, both physically and spiritually. Getting back to a more practical sense, what do I mean by decentralization? And I'm glad that this was talked about last night. Well, when Arthur Morgan talked about small local community, he talked about small towns, to be sure, but urban neighborhoods can also function as small communities. And this urban-rural question, I think, is a very important one. And many people point out to us that urban neighborhoods, urban areas are very dense, and of course, so that means less transportation for people to go from home to work to stores, and that mass transit is, of course, more practical. But urban areas are without access to sufficient land resources, so they have to bring in the resources from elsewhere, And of course, they need to dispose their more concentrated wastes elsewhere as well. Now, rural areas do have the problem of transportation to deal with, though they have enough land for food and water and energy procurement and for waste recycling. And due to this and to the need for vast amounts of labor to repopulate our farms and to participate in other more land-based economic activities, I think re-ruralization around small towns with a high degree of regional interdependency is going to be the most likely form of development over the next century. And the dying small towns of today, which are prevalent in Ohio and Michigan and elsewhere, I think are going to be the future economic powerhouses and the vibrant cultural centers for this agrarian revival that we're going to see. So in some communities, about sharing, conserving, and living with our local resources, which we acknowledge is scarce because we feel that scarcity, rather than depleting and competing over and consuming and destroying, really, our seemingly abundant global resources, which we now know are not abundant. But the values of community transmitted through interdependent living, I think, are also critical in helping us through these coming challenges. Values such as cooperation, moderation, frugality, charity, mutual aid, confidence, trust, courtesy, loyalty, integrity. Morgan talked about all of these things, which you come to acknowledge when you live close with other people and you know that resources, that there's only so much to go around. In community living, risks and opportunities are shared, relationships have the highest priority, and there's intimate personal acquaintance. And of course, think of some of the values that are prevalent today, non-community values mostly, and their role in exacerbating the crisis at hand: individualism, selfishness, comfort, convenience, and indulgence. In this system, wealth accumulation is the highest priority, not relationships, and we have less intimacy, and intimacy with fewer people. A study done in the US showed that from 1980 to 2004, the number of close confidants that people had dropped from 3 to 2, and the number of people without any close confidants had more than doubled. Our author Wendell Berry talks about the dominant system as the global economic party, and he contrasts it with what he calls the community party. He says of the global party that it's self-aware, highly organized, small in number, and increasingly powerful. The community party is just becoming aware of itself. It's small, though potentially numerous, and it's weak, though latently powerful. So instead of lamenting the power that the global economic party has, let's spend our precious time and energy developing our potential. This is something that I see at many conferences. We cannot put our energy into lamenting that anymore. We have to develop our potential. And you know what? I'll take the potential over the power any day, because I think that we truly are the ones with the power after all. I want to end my talk with kind of a final plea for action. I think one of the things that Aaron asked me to do is kind of send you all out charged and ready to get to work. And you know, I think we can delay our action by some of the measures that I've mentioned, and there's other measures we can delay our action by. Blaming other people for the problems in which we find ourselves is another one, like oil companies in the current administration. And I think this might make us feel better temporarily, but in reality, it really is us, the billion or so overconsumptive middle class of the planet, who are the greatest perpetrators of global destruction. It's not the small number of elite consumers or the destitute and more self-reliant majority of the world, even though people like to blame those destitute and self-reliant Chinese. So we are truly the problem, but we are the solution as well. That's the good news. And really the changes that we make in our lives can have more of an impact on global resource use than entire communities in other parts of the world or entire communities in the future as we head down Hubbard's Peak. And I know sometimes it might feel like knowledge of impending doom is a curse rather than a blessing. I'm with you on that. But we do have a tremendous opportunity to have a head start here and to develop the contingency plans. You know, we are the organic agronomists in Cuba in 1989. And I think we need to be creating models at every level that we can in our lives, in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our institutions, and sharing those models, because that's really what's going to move ahead. One of our models is a neighborhood community we're calling Agraria.